The Vital Way, where ancient wisdom meets the cutting edge to optimize your vitality and performance. There are no right ways, just better ways.
Welcome to the Vital Way podcast. I'm Logan Christopher of both Superman Herbs and Legendary Strength, and we have an exciting call talking about one of my favorite subjects, testosterone, today. Joining me is Dr. Farhan Ph.D, a.k.a., a little bit easier to pronounce, Doc Testosterone, which I really like that name. Thanks for joining us, Doc T.
Hey, thanks, Logan. Thanks for having me, man. Really excited for this.
Yeah, it's always a great subject to talk about. In talking about with other people, I feel like just talking about testosterone increases testosterone, so it's a good subject, right?
Yeah, man. Gets me excited too.
Excellent. So just a little bit about Doc Testosterone. He's professionally trained with a Ph.D. in neuroscience, and lately he's been a health and fitness educator specializing in developing state-of-the-art diet, lifestyle, and fitness programs to naturally boost testosterone. Like I said, subject very near and dear to my heart. Do you want to go a little bit into your backstory for people that may not be familiar with you? How did you get on this path? How did you go from neuroscience to testosterone?
Yeah, man, absolutely. So basically, I was in grad school. I spent 10 years in grad school. I did my master's and PhD in Montreal. And I don't know, a lot of people aren't familiar with grad school life, but it's basically takes a toll on your health. Your sleep is really just it's very deficient. In your nutrition is kind of you just kind of slack off on it, and also just exercise is really hard to do. I mean, these are excuses, but it's basically very prevalent in all of grad students. So when that happened to me over the 10 years, I kind of felt that I had to do a transformation in my life and get in track towards feeling better and sleeping better and not feeling groggy in the morning and actually looking good. You know, when I look at myself and just get my life on track from a health and fitness perspective. So I got my testosterone checked. It was as low as that of an 80-year-old man. So I was like, holy cow, what's happening? So I just made a call in life, which is when I finish grad school, when I finish my PhD, I'm just going to make a drastic change. And that's what I did. I essentially wanted to, work on my health. I also wanted to work on my social anxiety issues. That was a big part of my sort of deficiency in grad school. So I just got back and, got my life back together. I trained with Elliot Hulse at Strength Camp in Florida for almost a year. I also went to Vegas to kind of become more social. I started working for a social dynamics company to learn how to interact with people and kind of overcome my social anxiety. I improved my posture. I improved my breathing. Just kind of a 180 turn in terms of health and fitness. And now, since I had the scientific background anyway, and I used that to learn everything and actually take those actions based on rigorous science, I was able to transform my life, man. Thank God. I just very privileged. And then I helped out a bunch of my friends back in the day, and they're like, you know what, you should do a product and you should you do a YouTube channel. And I was like, maybe, okay, and then here we are, Doc Testosterone, and things are going really well, man.
Excellent. So I'm curious, as a professionally trained neuroscientist, besides, being quite familiar with research and diving into that, but with that neuroscience angle, how has that perhaps made you look at testosterone differently than other people?
Yeah, man, that's an interesting question because a lot of people don't understand the practical nature of being a scientist, right? A lot of people think of neuroscience or any science for that matter as just somebody in a lab with a lab coat, and which is all true as well. But for me personally, I've looked at things from a very quantitative level. I look at things, I always tend to take a step back and develop a hypothesis, right? So even back in the day when I had low testosterone, I was like, why do I have low testosterone? Is it the fact that it's just testosterone, or it's my lifestyle? What is interacting with this hormone? And then so I took a step back and just looked at it very much like a scientist would, right? And having the privilege of being a neuroscientist, I tend to look at things from a neuroscience perspective. So what is happening in the brain, right? So a lot of my fitness colleagues, when they get asked questions about testosterone, they're not really thinking about the brain much, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're thinking about, oh, yeah, you just got to lift more and you just have to work on your legs, you know, or just like lift heavy.
Right.
And that's just half, not even half, it's probably less than half the equation. And so I tend to look at the brain a lot, right? What's happening in the brain? What triggers certain hormones to be actually released? And not just from a pure biochemical perspective, but also a systems perspective, right? So when I did my master's and PhD, I studied both very molecular, cellular level processes, but also on a systems level, right? So I was recording from monkeys and, we had electrophysiology, recording electrical activity. So I tended to look at systems. And so now when I talk to my students, my clients, they always tend to understand the practical nature of what the benefits are from the fact that I'm a neuroscientist. And they actually get that because it's such a complex system.
Yeah, I like that you say that, and that's what I feel, I guess, many people in the scientific realm are lacking. Because when you dive into science, right, you're getting to that molecular level, it keeps getting reduced into smaller and smaller things that if you go down that path, which can be very useful, but sometimes it's hard to look at the bigger picture, or as you're saying, the whole system. So I like that you really bring that in.
Yeah, man. And, even if I look back to my grad school career, every time there was a complicated topic that we had to explain to the lay public, be it high school students, college students, or even just general public in the city, I was always the first one to say, you know what, I'm going to take this project because this is really cool stuff. I want to benefit people, because a lot of my colleagues now that are still doing research and doing the molecular cellular stuff, I think about it and say, man, that's amazing stuff that they're doing, but they can bring so much value to society. And that's one thing that science is really lacking, man.
Yeah. So, and feel free to dive into the science and talking about molecules. I think we have a lot of advanced listeners, and if people aren't there, that's fine. They'll get some of the big picture stuff along with this. But I'm curious to explore. So, as a neuroscientist, how specifically do some of the neurotransmitters like dopamine interact with testosterone or other hormones? Like, they're basically, it's just a different name, they're both chemicals, right? Neurotransmitters and hormones are just kind of operating in different areas. So how do these things all interact?
Yeah.
I know that's a broad question, but have at it.
Oh, yeah, that's really cool, actually, because one thing is a lot of people, they tend to just use testosterone, or not testosterone, hormone when they mean neurotransmitter and vice versa, right? So there are a couple of differences, right? So the main difference is that a neurotransmitter interacts with a neuron on a very molecular level. So it's like microns, right? A micron is like less than a nanometer, right? So that is how neurotransmitters are actually processing within the brain, right? As well as in the gut, other parts of the body. Neurotransmitters are not just in the brain, right? But the difference is that a hormone travels long distances normally, right? So whereas a neurotransmitter, it's released from the presynaptic terminal for all the advanced guys, and then it travels to the postsynaptic terminal, and that is how the neurons are communicating with each other. But then a hormone is not so much in terms of proximity, right? So for example, when you think of the release of testosterone, right? So testosterone is produced in the testes, right? In Leydig cells of the testes. But the way it works is there is a hormone, which is luteinizing hormone, LH, that is released by the pituitary gland in the brain, and it travels all the way through your blood to the testes, to the Leydig cells, and that triggers the production of testosterone in the Leydig cells. So whereas hormones take a long time to actually get to where they need to be, neurotransmitters are happening within microseconds, milliseconds. So that's the biggest difference between a neurotransmitter and a hormone. But then there's hormones like oxytocin that are both neurotransmitters and hormones. right? So that's how they're interacting. Now, you asked about the interplay of these hormones. That's an interesting question too. So there's multiple ways that these hormones interact. So one specific topic is just in the brain, right? So if you look at, for example, prolactin, right? For a lot of listeners out there who are fathers, or they might, they might not be fathers, but they have a long-term relationship. What tends to happen is, especially when a baby is born, a father has an increase in prolactin levels. Okay. Now, the thing with prolactin is it tends to decrease testosterone levels, right? Now, this is very practical for our guys because, if you're listening there and you're a father, you might have been more, let's just say promiscuous or more, you would be more attracted to a female when you saw her, right? Because now you have higher libido and so on. But then when you become a father, there's an increase in prolactin levels, and that tends to decrease testosterone levels, right? Now, the interplay between these two has a lot to do with dopamine, right? So specifically what happens is dopamine has an inhibitory effect on what triggers prolactin levels, okay? So there's something known as a prolactin-releasing hormone that is released by the hypothalamus. And so what dopamine does is inhibits that process and in turn increases testosterone levels, because now prolactin is no longer able to decrease testosterone. So that is how these guys are interacting from a libido perspective or a sex drive perspective. So that's one way to look at it.
Okay, very excellent. I've also heard testosterone described as a neurohormone. Does it play a role specifically in the brain and the nervous system beyond many of the other effects that people associate testosterone to?
Yeah, absolutely, man. So it's really cool, right? So testosterone is also known as an androgen, right? There's other androgens as well, but testosterone is the main one. And the way testosterone works, be it in the brain or be it anywhere else in the body, is by binding to androgen receptors. So there are androgen receptors also in the brain, right? Now, the reason it's known as a neurohormone is because, well, obviously it is interacting in the brain, so that's where the neuro comes from, and it's a hormone because it is traveling in the blood to actually do those whatever benefits that it's providing, whatever functions it's providing, right? So obviously testosterone is involved in a myriad of functions. So whichever function that is, it is acting as a hormone. Now, the reason it is sometimes looked at as a sort of like a transmitter or something that is happening in a neuron is because it is affecting a neuron by interacting with its nucleus, right? So you have to think of receptors as, there are different types of receptors, right? So some receptors are extracellular. They are located outside the cell, right? So for example, a dopamine receptor, like a D2 receptor, right? That's the receptor that people associate with, for example, like porn addiction and all the your brain on porn stuff is all about D2, because they found that the D2 receptor is what is responsible for different types of addictions, not necessarily porn specifically, but all types of addictions. So that receptor is outside the cell. It's extracellular. But the way the androgen receptor works is that it's inside the cell. So when testosterone diffuses inside a neuron, it has to bind to this androgen receptor, which is going to interact with the genetic factors which are inside the nucleus, right? So it's actually going to interact with the DNA of that cell, right? So it's known as a transcription factor because it will enable transcription, translation, protein synthesis, and then eventually gene expression. Now, why is that important? Because gene expression is what allows someone to actually have a phenotype, right? So, for example, if you think of hair growth, right? So one way testosterone works is it binds to androgen receptors on certain types of hair follicles, right? So, for example, a beard, right? So the reason we have a beard is because there's androgen receptors that are on the follicles of those hairs, right? And there are different types of follicles. There's vellus and terminal and different types of follicles, and some get some stay for life. Some, like for example, male pattern baldness, they don't stay for life, right? So that's also androgen dependent, right? So then that's again testosterone binding to androgen receptors, causing male pattern baldness, right? So that is how this is the interplay of why people think of testosterone as actually sort of like a transmitter, because it is going inside the cell. It is acting on the molecular and genetic expression of the cell.
Fascinating. I've never heard it described in those terms. That's excellent. Excellent. Speaking of the hair loss or the hair, DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone, a metabolite of testosterone, gets blamed for this issue. How much do you know about how that is working, and is having a high testosterone really what causes people to go bald?
Oh yeah, I know a lot about that stuff. Actually, a lot of my clients, they're teenagers, right? So they're like, oh man, doc, why don't I have a beard? I want to have a beard. And there's all these questions I get on email and YouTube comments. Yeah. So this is a really cool topic, man, because this is what's interesting. A lot of people associate androgens, including testosterone, dihydrotestosterone, which is a metabolite, with hair loss or, for example, hair growth. It's not such an easy process. It's not so simple, right? Because if you think of male pattern baldness, for example, right? For some people, so we know for sure that it is androgen dependent. So if you have male pattern baldness, it is because of androgens. It is because of testosterone, and it is mainly because of the DHT part, that metabolite of testosterone. That is why it's happening. Now, the caveat here is that for some people, depending on their genetics, the male pattern baldness won't happen even though they have high testosterone, right? So for some people, testosterone will cause them to become bald. And that is because of testosterone, period, and DHT specifically, right? Because DHT is actually 10 times more potent than testosterone itself. It's super, super strong, right? And then you have the opposite side, which is something like a beard, right? A beard is also androgen dependent. It's also DHT dependent. But the way it works is the metabolite is acting on follicles that are terminal, which means they last your entire life, right? So when a baby is born, it is born with something called vellus follicle. Sorry, VELLUS, vellus. And so that's sort of like, because those hairs are going to go away, right? Like for a baby, it has vellus follicles and they're going to go away. But then there are some processes that allow the vellus to become terminal, and that is because of androgens, specifically DHT, right? So then some people retain their hair for life. Nothing happens. Their hair, they don't have hair loss because they have terminal hairs, which don't get converted back to vellus, the vellus type of hair. So that is how some people are bald and some people are not bald.
Okay. So if someone say they have low testosterone and they work to increase that, is that increasing their risk for hair loss, or is that really...
No, absolutely
although
not.
Even though it's androgen dependent, that's not really the issue at play.
No, that's ridiculous, man. A lot of people ask that because they say, oh, I mean, this is how I think of it, right? A lot of people like, oh man, I have low testosterone and I have this problem where my wife is not satisfied because she gets bored. I fall asleep really fast because my libido is not there. Or man, I'm not getting gains at the gym. What I tell them first is, look, man, I understand the pain. I was there, right? But the hair loss should not be what's keeping you from becoming more masculine, right? You know what I mean? And then I read up on the evolutionary psychology of hair loss, and it turns out that evolutionary psychologists, a lot of them believe that back in the day, caveman days, the baldness sign was actually a sign of wisdom. It's actually a sign of, hey, we have a tribe leader who is bald. We know he's old because baldness is a sign of old age, but he's still there. He's not dead yet, right? So he did something amazing to survive this long, And so we should have him as a leader, right? So that's one amazing thing about being bald, right? So a lot of people, I tell them, I actually did a mastermind with Brandon Carter a couple of weeks ago in Miami, and he was telling me like, yo, man, one of the best, some of the best people are bald, right? So he's like Tupac and Michael Jordan and Buddha, you named all it's hilarious. But yeah, man, and turns out it's not even gonna do hair loss because it is something that's genetic, right? So if you, and the other thing is, it's not, you don't need like a super high level of testosterone for baldness. You only need a little bit, right? So there are people who have low testosterone who are bald, right? Because their genetics is such that the low level of testosterone that they have is more than enough for them to be bald. So if you increase your testosterone, it's not going to make you bald or not. It's going to make you whatever you are, whatever your genetics are. But then it's going to enable you to have all the other benefits.
Right. Yeah. So it's not so much about the testosterone or DHT as it is about the receptors, which is more governed by genetics.
That's right.
Excellent. Okay. Cool. Well, we've talked a little bit about the androgen receptors, and this I feel, everyone, if they're getting blood or saliva test, right, you see total testosterone, you see free testosterone, that sort of thing. But this stuff's only so useful as the kind of the health of those androgen receptors, right? Whether they're extracellular, intracellular. So what are some of the things that we can do to help support the health of our cell receptors? Because I feel that's a not often addressed point, but very important.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, that's a great point. So first of all, just taking a step back, a lot of the guys who are listening might not know about what total testosterone and all these things are. So I'm going to touch on it briefly.
Sure.
Okay. So total testosterone is if you counted every single testosterone molecule in your body, that's your total testosterone. Okay. Now, total testosterone is not that important because a lot of testosterone in the body is bound to different proteins that don't allow it to actually be used, right? And that's where free testosterone comes in. Free testosterone is that which is being able to use when you need it, right? So, for example, nighttime erections are testosterone dependent, right? It's called nocturnal peniletumescence. It's basically, something like morning wood or erections that happen during REM sleep. Those are testosterone dependent. So testosterone that is free is able to be used for those specific types of tasks. Okay? Now, then there's something called bioavailable testosterone, which is essentially the most important one. And that is because that testosterone is the free testosterone plus the testosterone that is not bound very tightly or very strongly to proteins, right? So bioavailable testosterone is what we want to associate most with what we want to gain, right?
And that's the ones bound to the albumin but not sex hormone binding globulin,
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're bound to albumin. There's also, testosterone can also bind to estrogen, for example, and other molecules have 1 or 2% chance to do that. But yeah, albumin is what you got it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in terms of receptors, right? So the way we want to think of receptors is that is sort of the limiting factor. That is the bottleneck when it comes to just becoming. So there's two. Let's take another step back, right? Just before I explain that, there's two categories of men, right? There's hypogonadal and eugonadal, right? Hypogonadal is low testosterone. It has been classified clinically as low testosterone. And then eugonadal is essentially those that don't have low testosterone. So they are in the good reference range. And just for some practical thing for your guys, so if you're listening and you've already done a testosterone test, just keep in mind that those references that they usually give you at the blood clinic are kind of skewed simply because they had to do those references when the blood clinic actually got started, right? Which could have been 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 15 years ago. And that reference range is from that many years ago. And usually it's old people who do these testosterone tests because these types of tests weren't so prevalent like they are today, that young men can do them. So take that reference range with a grain of salt. And so in one sense, I always stress quantitative measurements, keep track of numbers. But then in this specific, this is sort of like an outlier where you can look at the number, but also look at the qualitative aspects of low testosterone and base it on that. Super important.
Yeah, I did a podcast interview with Dr. Rick Cohen where we kind of talked about the art of testing because even though there's these numbers, right, and we think it's science and exact, there really is, like you said right there, there's the issues with that, different times of testing, how that can affect everything. So you really do have to look at both, as you're saying, the quantitative and the qualitative aspects of it. Plus, people are individuals, so just because it's in the reference range doesn't mean that's optimal or healthy for you as an individual, because different people are going to be different, right?
Absolutely, man. That's so true. So true. Now let's get to finally the androgen receptor paradigm. It's so cool, right? So you can pair an androgen receptor concept to literally any receptor, right? Because receptors work in a similar way. Even though, for example, a dopamine receptor is extracellular, a testosterone receptor and androgen receptor is intracellular, they can still serve as bottlenecks and the limiting factor in getting gains based on whatever you want to do, right? So let's tackle this problem from a perspective of watching porn, right? Because this is a big topic. I know a lot of the guys listening probably watch porn and masturbate and so on and so forth. I know a lot of my guys, when I do surveys and stuff, they do have.
It's kind of something everyone does, but no one talks about, right?
Oh man, for sure. And you know what I do with my guys is I do surveys which are anonymous, so they are very frank, man. I mean, they'll tell me, "Hey, dude, I masturbate 6 to 7 times a day. Take it or leave it." It was really interesting. So the way it works is if you get a crazy release, and what I mean is like a supra threshold release of any kind of neurotransmitter or hormone, what's going to happen is that these receptors are going to get saturated, right? So when you look at, for example, for porn addiction, you can think of like a dopamine receptor, like a D2 receptor. If you watch a lot of porn, then these receptors tend to get saturated, and that is when desensitization happens, right? So even though you have all this dopamine in the synaptic cleft, which is basically the space between two synapses, there's nowhere for them to go, right? What are they going to bind to? Because these receptors are now saturated. There are no more receptors there, right? And similar paradigm you can think about when it comes to androgen receptors, even though they're inside the cell, right? Because if you get a lot of testosterone release, right? So here's where TRT comes in, right? Testosterone replacement therapy. A lot of steroid users, a lot of juicers and people who are on gear, they're injecting themselves with testosterone. So this testosterone, it has to bind to androgen receptors to actually do its thing, right? So as it's binding now, what's happening is these androgen receptors are getting depleted, right? They're getting desensitized, and you're telling your negative feedback system in the brain to stop releasing the hormones that are producing testosterone, right? So now it's like a double whammy. Not only are your receptors being depleted and desensitized, but the natural production of these hormones or neurotransmitters will be significantly lower.
Right. So besides, not getting TRT or steroids, what are some of the things we can do that just help support, I guess, the healthy functioning of the androgen receptors, just in general? I
would say that you should keep a balance in terms of your lifestyle, right? So, for example, a lot of people, for example, androgen receptors will be increased if you do compound movements, right? So whatever increases testosterone also tends to increase androgen receptors. I mean, this system is working in tandem, right? So It's not that if you're boosting testosterone, it's not just you're going to get a bunch of testosterone in your body, but then there's no receptor happening, right? Receptors have to balance out the testosterone that is being formed, right? But it's not going to happen, obviously, in a linear way. It's going to happen in a nonlinear way. So whatever you're doing in terms of lifestyle, to increase your testosterone levels tend to also increase the receptor levels, although this research is not as conclusive and it has not been done as much as just the boosting testosterone research.
Right. Well, one of the things I think about, right, because with whether it's extracellular or intracellular, right, things have to pass through the cell membrane,
yes,
which is largely made of fat. And so my sort of hypothesis is that really by having high-quality fats in your diet, saturated fat, omega-3 fatty acids especially, this is going to help improve those cell membranes of every sort of cell in your body. And thus the cell membrane is not just a sac that holds the cell. It really is about this whole communication part. So does that sound right to you, that is going to be a critical point of keeping the cells healthy and thus the receptors healthy?
Absolutely, man. And I'm just going to touch on it a little bit more. So specifically the cell membrane, especially in the brain, a lot of it is made out of cholesterol and the DHT, right? DHT is one of the...
you mean DHA?
DHA.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so DHA is a omega-3 fatty acid, which the cell membrane, 25% of the cell membrane is made out of DHA. Right, in the brain. Now, the thing is, if you are taking food, so high fatty foods, for example, salmon, nuts, egg yolks, and so on, that will boost your testosterone, but it is very hard to get DHA in just normal whole foods. It's not as easy. That is why one of the few supplements that I recommend is fish oil, which has, and specifically try to get 1,000 mgs per day of that DHA, right? Yeah. So the importance of a cell membrane, it's sort of semi-permeable. It lets some things in, it doesn't let some things in. And the neat part of a cell membrane is that it is sort of the most important thing when it comes to absorption of nutrients, right? So whatever nutrients you're taking in, be it, a lot of people are deficient, right? So for example, vitamin D, zinc, magnesium, right? A lot of people are deficient in these, and sometimes it's not just because you're not getting them, it's because they are not passing through to the cell. The cell is not able to absorb these nutrients. So working on the cell membrane part of the process, the mechanism, allows these nutrients to actually get inside the cell and have a better quality of life. And omega-3 fatty acids, definitely one. Saturated fat is great. Cholesterol, obviously. Monounsaturated fats like avocados and olive oil. Yeah, man, excellent.
Right. Excuse me. So I guess going back a little bit, we talked a tiny bit about the sex hormone binding globulin, and a lot of people see that get elevated pretty heavily, especially into older age. What are some of the things we can do about sex hormone binding globulin? And according to science, do we know why this one seems to raise so much more as age goes up?
Yeah, so the reason that SHB, this actually applies also to TRT guys, right? Because a lot of guys who take testosterone injections, and obviously you know that this is like, it's almost ubiquitous now in the world. Any like MD who kind of graduates, doesn't really know what to do, he's like, you know what, I'm just going to open up a testosterone clinic and start injecting people because it's so crazy now, right? Yeah. I mean, I have 17-year-old guys who are emailing me saying, hey man, I've been on TRT since a year and now I have gynecomastia, right? Which is man boobs, right?
Wow.
And I'm like, holy cow. So it's because it's about balance and compensation, right?
Right. And that's kind of the science looking at when, testosterone's good, therefore let's look on testosterone, not realizing that there's this whole symphony of things going together. And if you just, shoot something in to increase it that much, then it's going to cause some other things to go askew.
Yeah, man. No, that's absolutely right. Yeah, and it's just the world we live in. A lot of the times we think of technology and science as some amazing stuff. Medical research is amazing, and it is. But then you have people that misuse it. They use it in a win-lose type of way instead of a win-win way. And these are these MDs who just graduate like, I have a clinic now. Even if you're 17 years old, I'm going to inject you with testosterone in a couple of weeks. Like, holy man. it's just like, it's mind boggling to me. And I don't know what's going to happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now.
Yeah.
Right. But, yeah, man. Yeah. Sorry to go on a tangent, but as testosterone is being increased in the body, it has to bind to molecules that it has affinity for, right? Mm-hmm. And it turns out that SHBG and albumin have a very high affinity for testosterone relative to other proteins, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, SHBG is going to bind to testosterone. So if you're injecting yourself, or if you're sort of like old age is happening and your free testosterone is declining, then SHBG is going to bind more and more to testosterone. And it's not just SHBG, it's also estrogen and as I mentioned, albumin. And that mm-hmm. is why it's binding, because the affinity, let's say the attraction, or how much they sort of like each other, is very high for SHBG. That is why it binds to it and not mm-hmm. other proteins.
Mm-hmm. So what causes the increase? Because if I remember correctly, SHBG is produced in the liver,
yes.
and just so more of this ends up circulating around, more of it gets bound to testosterone and other things. What causes this increase?
The increase is not what's crucial. The thing that's crucial is that it's binding more and more to testosterone, because there is less and less free testosterone. So testosterone is unable to free itself from SHBG. That is what's crucial here, right?
So it's basically the testosterone's not strong enough to get away from this.
Yeah, no, but the question is, why is that, right? Now, one specific study that I know has to do with magnesium. It's so cool, right? So magnesium is one of these, like, oh yeah, magnesium, whatever. But magnesium is very crucial to the brain. It interacts with excitatory synapses, right? So like NMDA receptors have a magnesium component to them. But specifically for testosterone, magnesium, it's called a non-conflicting binding, right? Without any conflict binding to SHBG. So if you have enough magnesium in your body, then magnesium is going to bind to SHBG without any competition, and that will free up testosterone more. So one big reason why testosterone binds more and more to SHBG older in life is because people start deteriorating their own health because they are not taking in enough green vegetables, right?
Right. Magnesium's something that I've heard like 90% of people are chronically deficient in.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah. Magnesium, zinc, and vitamin D, man. These three are just like crucial for testosterone. And it's just very deficient, man. I mean, even people in California are deficient. I mean, as you know, you live there, right? People in Florida, Texas, and I'm like, man, I was in Montreal for 10 years. I craved the sun, you know?
Yep.
So many people have it. I don't know what they have.
Yeah. Okay. You also mentioned a little bit about morning wood and nocturnal peniletumescence, which is definitely something we've talked about before. Cool. Can you go into a bit more detail? How does testosterone trigger this to occur?
Yeah, man. Awesome. Great question. So.
And also, what may be the difference between that and like us, getting an erection for sex?
Right.
What are some of the differences and similarities in the play of testosterone in both?
Right. So morning wood is an amazing sign of something. If you're not getting morning wood, right? So let's say you are getting a lot of morning wood, and then something happened in your life, and now you don't have it anymore, right? So I didn't have morning wood for like years, like pretty much all of grad school. I never had morning wood, and my friends had it. They talked about it. They're kind of like, oh man, you should have seen. I was like, oh, what the hell's going on? So now the difference is. So many key differences. The first difference is nocturnal peniletumescence, NPT, happens at night during REM sleep, right? REM sleep is when testosterone is actually produced in the Leydig cells, and that specific aspect of erection is dependent on testosterone. It's androgen dependent. Now, the difference between these two is that the sex erection, right? Erection from a female and so on, that is more dopamine dependent, right? So a lot of people confuse this, right? They think testosterone is dependent for all of erection, but not so. The nightly erections that happen during REM sleep, right? That is testosterone dependent, and just the normal erection that is happening in sex, that of course it's aided by testosterone, right? Don't get me wrong here. Like it's not directly testosterone dependent, it's indirectly testosterone dependent. Why? Because testosterone enables sex drive, it enables libido, right? And that is what will cause the interplay with dopamine and the erection to actually happen. Now, the second part of your question is how, right? So essentially what happens is in the brain, there are dopaminergic cells, right? They have dopamine inside in the cell body, right? And as they release dopamine, they bind to what is called an oxytocinergic cell. They have oxytocin inside, right? And a lot of this is in the hypothalamus, which is sort of the arousal, quote unquote, center of the brain, as people say. You know, it's also arousal, thirst, and things like that. So this interplay in the hypothalamus from dopamine to oxytocin enables those oxytocinergic neurons to bind to the spinal cord, right? So it's not just the spinal cord, you know, they go to the spinal cord, they go to the hippocampus, which is in charge of memory and more recent memory and things like that. And they also go to the brainstem. But the specific part of the spinal cord connection is that the spinal cord connection is traveling all the way down to the penile arterioles, right, which is the arteries in the penis, and that connection will release nitrous oxide, and then that will go inside the cell, and then the interplay happens, causing a relaxation of that smooth muscle cell, which leads to erection, right? So that's sort of how it happens, and all of this is triggered by dopamine, because that's the first part of this mechanism. But then the nightly part of it is triggered by testosterone.
Okay. I was not aware of quite the differences in that. That's fascinating. One of the interesting studies I saw you quote in your manual, which we'll talk about in a little bit, was a Chinese study that looked at testosterone levels were highest on day 7 after sex.
Yes.
Could you go into a little bit of detail of that and what that means for people about, I guess, how frequently they should be having sex?
Yeah, that's a good one. This is a cool question because I'll highlight some of the sort of like from how a neuroscientist's brain works, right? And then this will be very insightful because, I mean, my 10 years of grad school, like these are the main takeaways that I'm about to give you, and then you can think like a scientist too, right? Now, the way scientists work is we have to form hypotheses, we have to do the results and so on and have a problem and all that. But there has to be publication, right? Things have to get published for them to be actually seen by the public eye, right? But then there are some studies that are done with negative results which don't show the hypothesis that was hypothesized. And those studies tend to not be shown, right? It's how science works. It's like hilarious stuff, but it is very political and so on. There's an actual, I've developed this method to actually vet science articles, right? Man, there's so many out there. Like which ones which ones don't you trust, right? But this specific study, what they did was they looked at the testosterone levels, the total testosterone levels of men over I believe it was a 16 to 21, it was 16 to 21 days, just depending, some people dropped out, some people didn't. The 16 to 21 day period, let's say 3 weeks. And what they wanted to do was to see without any kind of masturbation, ejaculation, sex, what happens to testosterone levels. And what they found is that over the first few days, nothing really happening, and then it peaks at day 7, and then it kind of plateaus. And then afterwards, it kind of declines. But the main aspect was that peak on day 7. Now, the interesting thing about that study is, yes, it's peer reviewed. It's kind of a lot of people refer to it, but it hasn't been replicated. right? That's what sucks, right? So that's a big part of being a scientist. Whenever I look at a study, I say, okay, this is a huge, huge implication, crazy, really practical benefit for people. Why hasn't it been replicated? Now, I speculate, right? The reason it hasn't been replicated is because it's actually been replicated, but from a negative result. And so it wasn't published, right? Now, that's okay. I mean, that's okay. It's something, we have, and, we can take it with a grain of salt, like any other study you should, right? What I tend to do is look at more meta-analysis, which look at 50 to 100 studies, and then, or reviews. There are amazing reviews out there, like neuroscience reviews and other reviews. I tend to look at those more because they give you a summary of many studies and give you some conclusive evidence, right?
Right.
So for the guys who are listening, who are thinking, hey, what's going to happen to my testosterone? I personally, I wouldn't say I don't believe this study, but I wouldn't put all my chips in with this study, right? Because it has also been found that testosterone boosts during sex, right? It has also been found that testosterone is spiked just by looking at a female or by going to a, they call it a sex club, these studies that have you go to a sex club and you watch this erotic stimuli. Testosterone increases. There's a peak. There's like a 25% or depending on the person, there's 15 to 25% increase in testosterone just by looking at a naked woman, right? Alive, right? Right?
Makes sense,
right? And then if you're engaging in intercourse, then your testosterone is going to increase even more, right? But then you get people who are, they're watching porn all the time, and then you have, again, we talked about the receptors being depleted and desensitized. So then now that's another issue. But for the takeaway is, do not by any means abstain from sex for 7 days so you'll have a boost in testosterone. Do not do that. You know why? Because why are we boosting our testosterone? Because we want to become more masculine, right? Because we want to have the benefits of what it is to be a man. And correct me if I'm wrong, but sex is one of them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. I really like the sort of dual nature of how these hormones work, that sex increases testosterone, yet you also need testosterone to have the libido to want to have sex. So, it works in both ways. Yeah. I'm curious, you mentioned with the science, that has some of these issues, and looking at the meta-analysis, right, that's going to take like a lot of science done over time, then you look at it. So it's kind of a lagging indicator of many things as far as what we know. I'm curious, what are some of your like personal hypotheses or ideas that maybe hasn't been covered in science yet, but that can help testosterone?
I would say let's focus on. I love that question. I love that question just because it tends to have you think out of the box, and also integrate your personal life into these kind of problems. Like, what can we do here, right? So
and we could put it in another way. What experiments or studies would you like to see conducted?
One thing I really like is this thing called SARMs, right? These are selective androgen receptor modulators. These have existed since the 50s, I believe, but there's not enough research on these, even though. So what are they, right? So what am I talking about? So selective androgen receptor modulators are they're chemicals, right? These are agonists or antagonists, which are essentially chemicals that act on a receptor selectively, right? So think of today, right? What do we have? We have problems where we have prostate cancer problems, right? So we know we have studies that have been done where if you essentially take the testosterone out of let's say a rat, right? There's like rat studies, mice studies. You take testosterone out of rats and mice, and the prostate cancer that was induced either through the experiment or some kind of mechanism, it actually goes away, right? So we know for a fact that prostate cancer is androgen dependent, right? Now, a lot of people, what they want is they want beard growth, right? They want libido, they want morning wood, They want muscle gains. They want to lose belly fat, but they don't want to have prostate cancer, right? So having SARMs, which is a selective androgen receptor modulator, will allow us to target certain receptors to have androgens act on them and other receptors to androgens not act on them. So that is what we would want at the end. We want specifically to allow, right? Because I mean, what is medicine for, right? What is technology and medical research for if we can improve people's quality of life, right? And you're not going to convince somebody to be like, oh yeah, I'm okay. Some people are crazy, man. Like in today's world, especially where facial hair is like super hip now, very trendy. A lot of guys have this very big pain point of, man, I can't grow facial hair, and that is why girls don't like me. Or even more is if you look at just body fat, right? Like gynecomastia is there, which is something that is because there's a lot of estrogen in someone's body. And obviously there's some, just like the breast glands are there too. But that's the surgery thing. That's people get carried away with that. But that is what I would like to see. Some modulators of these receptors that act on where we need them to act and don't act where we don't need them to act, right? That's one thing that I would like to see. The other aspect of in terms of testosterone that I would like more research on is this aspect of how stimulation in our lives is affecting testosterone, right? So I don't just mean chemical stimulation. So, we know about BPA in plastics that causes estrogen to increase. It converts testosterone to estrogen. This is known as a xenoestrogen. And there's other oxidative stress out there that we should be kind of wary of, which induces free radicals in the cell and so on. But what I really would like to see is some research on what is the effect of how much brain stimulation we're getting in every day, right? So if at night you are on your cell phone and you're doing your Snapchatting or whatever you're doing, your brain is getting that light signal. It is getting this crazy sensory stimuli, which is not normal for a human at night, right? Because we're sleeper on like after sunset, right? So how is that affecting testosterone, right? Porn is like another that's another monster in a porn addiction and all that. It's a huge thing. I'm actually writing a book right now about fapping. It's called To Fap or Not to Fap, and it's a really interesting book. I highlight how you can train your brain the way I did. I used a lot of neuroscience training just to get rid of, because I was addicted to porn, like crazy addicted, man, for years.
Yeah. That's something we wrote an article about that a little while, the whole porn-induced ED, how that the saturation of dopamine that you can get from that causes the desensitivity and, the problems that can bring. That's something I swore off of and been going strong on for a while now. And I'll touch on one more thing. The nutrition industry, the food industry right now is huge, man. I mean, for guys who are listening who are like investors or are kind of like in the VC field, there's a food bubble, man. Like when I was in Silicon Valley, I spent like 8 months there just researching food and nutrition and how the startups are doing and all the technology. And it seems that this aspect of what should people eat, right, is huge because for one, it's individual variability, right? For some people, fruit will kill them, right? They have fructose intolerance. And for some people, fruit is great for them. You know what I mean? It's the same thing with the lactose and these aspects. So what I would like to see is specific research on foods, the trade-off between foods that are boosting testosterone and other factors that these foods are causing. Right? So there's this big push by political figures and pharmaceuticals and so on, which claim that saturated fats are bad, right? They claim that cholesterol is bad, and this is not so, right? This is complete bullshit. But what I would like to see is research done that can
prove all these things that we're saying in a very significant and solid way, man. I would love to see that.
Yeah, there's some research out there, but not that much considering the importance of the topic. Well, thanks for sharing that. We're coming up on an hour here.
Cool.
Would you like to take a moment to tell people about your program? I mean, I hope people found this useful. I kind of asked a lot of questions of stuff I was interested in, not getting into so much of the basics. I mean, we barely touched on sleep or lifting or that much on diet, really, besides some specific things. So, yeah, if you want a lot more basic information, tell them a little bit about your program and who that will help most.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Awesome, man. So I have what is called the Doc Testosterone Plan, which I've been doing research on for the last few years. It's being refined and polished. It's essentially a lifestyle, natural testosterone boosting program where I teach you specifically what foods to eat. I also teach you what exercises to do, as well as your sleep protocol. I also delve into the science of testosterone and in a very practical way, so people can understand how exactly things are working so they can be more motivated to do things, right? I also talk about what factors in the environment kill testosterone. So essentially it's ebooks and videos, right? So there's 15 videos, very comprehensive. There's an ebook with a bunch of references at the end. And I also give you a bonus startup guide to enable you to have a menu, specific grocery list, specific protocol of exercise, exactly what to do every day, the sets and reps, and what supplements to take. That's all in there. And that's called the Doc Testosterone Plan. And basically all you have to do is it's just doctestosterone.com/supermanherbs. So I've made specific bonuses for you guys, just to benefit you, because I feel that, quite honestly, Superman Herbs is essentially a win-win company. I know what you guys stand for. Logan, like, you guys are doing a great job, man. Awesome. I haven't found a company like yours in a while. Right?
Thank you.
So if you go to doctestosterone.com/supermanherbs, you will find the plan there. And I also talk about my story. There's some details about the plan. There's a lot of value there. Just the video itself has a lot of value, and that's free. And I've also, just for your listeners, besides the bonus quick guide, I'm also going to include 4 additional bonuses, just because I like this company a lot. So one bonus is going to be my first ebook, which is the 5 factors killing your testosterone and how to fix them today. So I'm going to give away that bonus, as well as the audio book of that, which is my voice recording. And I'm very expressive in that, just like the way I am. I express myself very freely. And then the other 2 bonuses is my upcoming To Fap or Not to Fap ebook and audio book with my voiceover. And that is for guys who are curious about how porn addiction affects the brain, how to overcome it, how to reboot your brain. I know there are other programs out there, but mine is very much specific to science-backed research and how to specifically get your mind and your body back together like it was before you started watching porn. And so there's a lot of value in that. And yeah, man, it's basically how to optimize your life by doing natural things and just get back to boosting testosterone, masculinity, confidence, and be the man that we all want to be.
Nice. Well, thank you for doing that. I didn't know you were going to include all those bonuses, so highly recommend people check that out. I went through the program. I wouldn't have him here if we weren't talking about some cool things, if we didn't have good new information to share. So that was doctestosterone.com/supermanherbs.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Maybe we'll do this again in the future and dive into some more details about testosterone or some of those other areas you talked about as well.
Yeah, man, I loved it. And if you're, someone who's listening who has any question at all, just email me. It's just Farhan, which is my first name, Farhan, @doctestosterone.com. And I usually answer within 24 hours every email that I get. So feel free to ask me anything you want.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything today. I know I picked up a few things. Like one of the main things, I had no clue that magnesium had that role with sex hormone binding globulin, so I'm going to go spray myself with some magnesium right after this call and be good to go.
Right, brother. Thanks again, man.
Thanks very
I
much.
really love this, man. I really love this. Thanks so much for having me here, man. It's a privilege.
Absolutely. And thanks, everyone, for listening. As always, if you want to head over to iTunes, leave us a review. That just helps spread this information, or just, direct people to the site. Helps us out. Thanks so much for listening.